The ancient alien portal whirred to life with a deafening roar, a swirling vortex of blinding light erupting within its colossal metal ring. Human explorer Bobby Hall staggered back, shielding his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the discovery of a lifetime. Hall had found the portal on this remote, desolate moon, untouched for millennia, in an abandoned alien outpost. The technology was beyond anything he had ever seen, far surpassing even the most advanced human engineering. He had worked tirelessly to uncover its purpose, spending months studying the strange symbols etched into its frame, piecing together the code to activate it. And now, as the portal pulsed with energy, beckoning him forward, Hall knew there was no turning back. This could be the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe, to making contact with advanced alien civilizations light years beyond Earth. Or it could be a one-way ticket to oblivion. But Hall was never one to shy away from a challenge. With a deep breath, he stepped through the swirling vortex, ready to face whatever lay on the other side. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. This portal was their last hope. Hall paced restlessly in his cell, his mind racing with possibilities. He had to find a way out of this bizarre parallel universe and back to his own reality. As he observed the guards going about their duties, he noticed they all carried advanced handheld devices, using them to control various systems within the outpost. "Damn thing's on the fritz again," one guard grumbled, smacking his device against his palm. "Third time this week." "Let me take a look," Hall offered, approaching the force field that separated him from the guards. "I'm an engineer. I might be able to fix it." Boron, the lead guard, eyed him suspiciously. "You an engineer? Don't make me laugh." Hall met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I know I may just look like a primitive human to you, but where I come from, we've made some impressive technological leaps. Just give me a chance. What have you got to lose?" Boron hesitated for a moment, then deactivated the force field. "Fine, but try anything funny and you'll regret it." Under close supervision, Hall took the malfunctioning device and began to examine it. His fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, his mind absorbing the advanced technology like a sponge. Within minutes, he had identified the problem and repaired the device. "There you go," he said, handing it back to the astonished guard. "Good as new." Boron took the device, turning it over in his hands. "How did you do that? How does a primitive species like yours possess such knowledge?" Hall smiled. "In my universe, we discovered ruins left behind by a race called the Andorians. We reverse-engineered their technology, and it propelled us forward centuries in a matter of decades." "The Andorians?" Boron replied, his eyes widening. "They're the most powerful race in our galaxy. They view themselves as the chosen guardians, appointed by the progenitors themselves. But in your universe, they went extinct." Hall nodded. "It seems our universes have diverged in more ways than one." Boron was silent for a moment, considering the implications. "I must speak with my superiors about this. The idea of alternate universes, it's intriguing. In the meantime, I'll grant you limited access to our outpost systems. I want to see what else you're capable of." As Boron left to make his report, Hall settled in front of a console, his heart racing with excitement. He navigated through the database, absorbing everything he could about this strange parallel universe, and then he found it. Research on using the portals to cross between realities. The key to getting home. Hall leaned back in his chair, a plan beginning to take shape in his mind. He would play along with Boron for now, gain his trust. But when the time was right, he would make his move. One way or another, he would find his way back to where he belonged. Boron marched into the council chamber, his heart pounding as he faced the stern gazes of his superiors. He bowed his head, the weight of his report heavy on his shoulders. "Esteemed leaders," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I bring news of the human intruder, Bobby Hall. He claims to be from a parallel universe, one where the Andorians went extinct and humans discovered their technology." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. The High Counselor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is a grave matter, Boron. A human accessing the sacred portal could disrupt the very fabric of our society. He must be terminated immediately to prevent further contamination. Boron took a deep breath, gathering his courage. With all due respect, High Counselor, I believe Hall's unique perspective could be valuable to us. He has already demonstrated a remarkable understanding of progenitor technology. If we study him, we may gain new insights into the progenitor's wisdom and even locate their lost homeworld. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outraged. The High Counselor held up a hand for silence. You propose we spare the human's life after he defiled our most sacred relic? Boron nodded. I do, but only if he proves his worth. There is an ancient device in the vaults, one we have been unable to restore for generations. If Hall can repair it, we will know his knowledge is genuine and valuable. If he fails, he will be executed. The High Counselor considered this for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally he nodded. Very well, Boron. The human's fate rests in his own hands. But if he betrays us or fails in his task, the consequences will be severe. Boron bowed deeply. I understand, High Counselor. I will inform the prisoner of your decision. He turned and strode from the chamber, his mind racing. He had bought Hall some time, but now the pressure was on. If the human couldn't deliver on his promises, they would both face the Council's wrath. Back in the cell block, Boron deactivated the force field and stepped inside. Hall looked up from the console, his eyes bright with excitement. Boron, I think I found a way to... There's no time for that now, Boron interrupted. I spoke with my superiors about you. They wanted to have you killed for accessing the portal. Hall's face paled. Killed, but I didn't mean any harm. I'm just trying to get home. Boron held up a hand. I convinced them to spare your life, but only if you can prove your worth. They want you to repair an ancient progenitor device, one we've been unable to restore for generations. If you succeed, they'll allow you to live and study our technology further. If you fail... He let the unspoken threat hang in the air. Hall swallowed hard, but his expression was one of commitment. I'll do it. I'll fix the device. Just give me a chance. Boron nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. I knew you would say that. Come with me. He led Hall through the winding corridors of the outpost, past guards who eyed the human with open hostility. They entered a vast, dimly lit chamber filled with ancient relics and devices. In the center of the room stood a towering machine, its surface etched with intricate symbols and patterns. This is the device, Boron said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. We believe it was used by the progenitors to manipulate energy on a cosmic scale, but we've never been able to activate it. If you can repair it... Hall approached the device, his eyes wide with wonder. He ran his fingers over the symbols, his mind already racing with possibilities. I'll need tools and access to your database, but I think I can do it. As Hall set to work, Boron watched him closely. Tell me, human, in your universe, what drove your people to advance so quickly after discovering Andorian technology? Hall paused, considering the question. Curiosity, I suppose. A desire to understand the universe and our place in it. We've always been explorers, dreamers. When we found the Andorian ruins, it opened up new possibilities we had never imagined. Boron frowned. In our society, such curiosity is discouraged. Everyone has a predetermined role based on their caste. Obedience and tradition are valued above all else. Hall looked up from his work, surprise etched on his face. But don't you see that's what's holding you back? You have access to all this advanced progenitor technology, but you're not using it to its full potential because you're afraid of change. Boron bristled at the accusation. It is not fear that drives us, human. It is respect for the way things have always been. The progenitors entrusted us with their knowledge, and we must honor their legacy. Hall shook his head. But what if the progenitors wanted you to build on their knowledge, to keep pushing forward, exploring new frontiers? You can't just stay stagnant forever. Boron was silent for a long moment, mulling over Hall's words. As much as he wanted to dismiss the human's perspective, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to what he said. The Andorians had been technologically stagnant for generations, bound by the rigid confines of their caste system and adherence to tradition. Before he could respond, Hall let out a triumphant shout. The ancient device hummed to life, its surface glowing with an ethereal blue light. Boron stared in disbelief as Hall stepped back, a grin spreading across his face. "There," he said, dusting off his hands. "One repaired progenitor device as promised. Now about those portal schematics." Boron shook his head, a grudging respect for the human growing in his chest. "You've bought yourself some time, Hall, but don't think this means you're off the hook. The Council will be watching you closely." Hall nodded, his expression sobering. "I understand, but I meant what I said, Boron. Your people have so much potential. Don't let fear and tradition hold you back." As they left the chamber, the repaired device pulsing with energy behind them, Boron couldn't shake the feeling that the human's arrival had set something in motion. Something that could change the course of Andorian society forever. As Hall made the final adjustments to the ancient device, it hummed to life, its surface glowing with an intricate web of symbols and pathways. Boron watched in awe as the human stepped back, a triumphant grin on his face. "It's a navigational device," Hall explained, his eyes sparkling with excitement, "but not just for charting courses through space. This baby can map out routes through the entire portal network across multiple universes." The Andorian leaders gathered around, their expressions a mix of wonder and disbelief. The High Counselor stepped forward, examining the device with a critical eye. "You mean to tell us that the progenitors left a roadmap to their whereabouts, and it's been right under our noses all this time?" Hall nodded. "But there's a catch. The clues are scattered across different universes, accessible only by unlocking specific portals in a precise sequence. It's like a cosmic scavenger hunt." The High Counselor turned to Boron, his brow furrowed. "And you trust this human's word? How do we know he's not leading us astray?" Boron met his superior's gaze, his voice steady. "I've seen Hall's knowledge firsthand, and his theories align with obscure references in our most ancient texts. I believe he's onto something." Hall stepped forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I know I'm an outsider here, but I want to find the progenitors just as much as you do. They hold the key to understanding the true nature of the multiverse. Let me lead an expedition through the portal network. I can guide you to them." The council members exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves. Finally, the High Counselor held up a hand for silence. "Very well, human. You may have proven your worth by repairing the navigational device, but a journey across universes is no small undertaking. We will need time to prepare." As the council dispersed, Boron pulled Hall aside. "You did it," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "You convinced them." Hall grinned. "Well, I had a little help from a certain open-minded Andorian guard." Boron chuckled, but his expression quickly sobered. "Not everyone will be thrilled about this expedition, you know. There are some who fear what the progenitor's return could mean for our society. They may try to stop us." Hall's eyes narrowed. "Let them try. We'll be ready for whatever they throw at us." As they left the chamber, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, but the promise of unlocking the progenitor's secrets drove him forward. In the shadows of the council chamber, a hooded figure watched Hall and Boron depart, his eyes glinting with malice. He activated a communication device on his wrist. "The human has convinced the council to mount an expedition," he reported, his voice low and urgent. "We cannot allow them to reach the progenitors." "Understood," a distorted voice replied. "You know what must be done. Eliminate the human and anyone who stands in our way. The balance of power must be preserved at all costs." The hooded figure nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of a concealed weapon. "It will be done. The human will not leave this outpost alive." As Hall and Boron hurried through the outpost's winding corridors, The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Hall glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding as he caught sight of their pursuers. A group of armed Andorians, their faces twisted with anger and purpose. "Traitors!" one of them shouted, leveling his weapon at Hall. "You will not defile the progenitor's legacy with your heresy." Boron pushed Hall behind a pillar as a burst of energy sizzled past, scorching the wall beside them. "We need to get to the portal chamber," he hissed, his eyes darting around the corridor. "It's our only chance." Hall nodded, his mind racing. He had studied the outpost's layout extensively during his time in the database, searching for any advantage he could find. "This way," he said, gesturing to a narrow side passage. "It's a shortcut." They sprinted down the passage, the shouts of their pursuers growing fainter behind them. As they burst into the portal chamber, Hall's eyes widened at the sight of the massive metal ring, its surface shimmering with energy. "Hurry," Boron urged, his fingers flying over the control panel. "They'll be here any second." Hall joined him at the panel, his hands shaking as he inputted the coordinates for the first universe on the progenitor's roadmap. The portal flared to life, a swirling vortex of light and color erupting within the ring. Just as they stepped towards the portal, the doors to the chamber burst open, and the rival faction poured in, weapons raised. "Stop them!" their leader shouted, his face contorted with rage. Hall grabbed Boron's arm, pulling him towards the portal. "We have to go now!" But as they leapt into the vortex, a stray energy bolt struck the control panel, sending sparks flying. The portal flickered and wavered, its edges twisting and warping in ways that made Hall's stomach lurch. They tumbled through the vortex, their bodies stretched and compressed by the forces of interdimensional travel. When they finally emerged on the other side, Hall found himself face down in the dirt, his lungs heaving as he gasped for air. He pushed himself to his knees, blinking in the harsh, unfamiliar light. They were on a desolate plain, the ground beneath them cracked and scorched. In the distance, the ruins of a once great city loomed, its towers crumbling and its streets choked with debris. "Where are we?" Boron asked, his voice hoarse. "This isn't the universe we were supposed to go to." Hall shook his head, a sinking feeling in his gut. "The portal must have malfunctioned when it was hit. We could be anywhere." As they picked their way through the ruins, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and he found himself jumping at every shadow. "Look at this," Boron said, kneeling beside a shattered piece of technology. "This is progenitor design, but it's been modified with Andorian components." Hall frowned, his mind racing. "You think this universe was some kind of battleground between the progenitors and the Andorians?" Boron shook his head, his expression troubled. "Impossible. The progenitors were too powerful to be challenged by anyone." But as they delved deeper into the ruins, the evidence became harder to ignore. Everywhere they looked, they saw signs of a cataclysmic conflict, blast craters, scorch marks, and the twisted remains of war machines from both sides. "What if the progenitors didn't just disappear?" Hall mused, his voice low. "What if they retreated to this universe to escape some kind of war?" Boron opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a shrill alarm pierced the air. Hall whirled around, his eyes widening as a swarm of drones descended from the sky, their metal bodies glinting in the harsh light. "Intruder alert!" a distorted voice boomed from the drones. "Initiating elimination protocol." Hall and Boron dove for cover as the drones opened fire, energy bolts ripping through the air around them. Hall's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. They were outgunned and outnumbered, trapped in a universe they didn't understand. But as he looked at Boron, crouched behind a fallen pillar with his weapon raised, he knew they couldn't give up. They had come too far to let some ancient AI defeat them. "We need to find a way to shut down the defense system," he shouted over the din of the drone's fire. "There must be a control center somewhere in these ruins." Boron nodded, his eyes hard with willpower. "Lead the way, human. Let's show this AI what happens when it messes with the progenitors chosen." Together they charged out from behind cover, their weapons blazing as they fought their way through the swarm of drones. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, and Hall's ears rang with the deafening roar of the battle. But even as they pushed forward, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The AI's reinforcements would be here soon, and if they didn't find a way to shut down the defense system before then, they would be trapped on this war-torn planet forever, lost in a universe that was never meant to be their own. Hall's fingers flew over the control panel, sweat beading on his brow as he worked to shut down the AI's defense system. Boron stood guard, his weapon at the ready, picking off the drones that managed to break through their makeshift barricade. "Almost there," Hall muttered, his eyes locked on the screen. "Just need to bypass this last firewall." With a final keystroke, the drone suddenly went limp, crashing to the ground in a chorus of metallic clangs. Hall let out a triumphant whoop, turning to Boron with a grin. "We did it! The AI is offline!" But Boron wasn't celebrating. He was staring at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Look," he said, pointing to a set of coordinates that had appeared on the display. "This must be the location of the Progenitor Sanctuary, the last known refuge of my ancestors." Hall leaned in, committing the coordinates to memory. "We have to go there. It could hold the key to everything we've been searching for." They raced back to the portal, keying in the sequence that would take them to the next universe on the Progenitor's roadmap. As the vortex flared to life, they leaped through, bracing themselves for whatever lay on the other side. When they emerged, they found themselves in a bustling spaceport, surrounded by ships of every size and configuration. But something was different. The beings moving about the port were mostly human, with a smattering of other species mixed in, and the technology they were using was unmistakably progenitor in origin. "Where are we?" Boron asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "This can't be right. The Andorians should be the dominant species here." Hall shook his head, a theory forming in his mind. "Not in this universe. Look around. The humans here must have reverse-engineered progenitor tech, just like we did back in my reality." Before they could explore further, a sleek patrol ship descended from above, its weapons trained on Hall and Boron. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Unknown entities, you are trespassing in Terran Confederation space. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed." Hall raised his hands, giving Boron a pointed look. "Let's not fight them. We need their help." The patrol ship escorted them to a massive space station orbiting a nearby planet. As they disembarked, they were greeted by a delegation of humans and other species, all wearing the same uniform emblazoned with a symbol Hall didn't recognize. "I am Admiral Xander of the Terran Confederation," a tall, broad-shouldered man said, stepping forward. "You have entered our space without authorization and in possession of progenitor technology. Explain yourselves." Hall took a deep breath, knowing that their next words could determine the fate of their mission. "Admiral, we come from alternate universes where the progenitors have long since vanished. We're on a quest to find their last refuge and learn from their wisdom." Xander's eyes narrowed. "A likely story. How do we know you're not spies or saboteurs?" Hall met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because I have the coordinates to the Progenitor Sanctuary, and I'm willing to share them with you." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Xander stepped forward, his expression eager. "Show me." Hall input the coordinates into a nearby console, bringing up a star map that rotated slowly above their heads. Xander and his advisors studied it intently, murmuring amongst themselves. "We've been searching for the progenitors for decades," Xander said at last, his voice hushed with awe. "If this is truly the location of their sanctuary, it could change everything. The knowledge we could gain, the technologies we could unlock." He turned to Hall and Boron, his eyes shining with excitement. "We will help you in your quest. The Terran Confederation has ships and resources beyond anything you've seen. Together, we will find the progenitors and bring their wisdom back to the galaxy." As they shook hands, sealing their alliance, Hall couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. They were so close now, so close to unlocking the secrets that had eluded them for so long. But even as they prepared for the journey ahead, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the multiverse, forces were mobilizing against them, determined to stop their quest at any cost. They would have to be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of countless universes hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. Hall stared at the star map floating above the conference table, the coordinates to the progenitor sanctuary pulsing with an ethereal glow. Around him, the Terran experts murmured excitedly, their fingers flying over datapads as they calculated the optimal route through the portal network. Boron stood at Hall's side, his expression a mix of anticipation and unease. "Are you sure about this, Hall?" he asked, his voice low. "We're risking everything on this mission. If we fail—" Hall met his gaze, his eyes hard with perseverance. "We won't fail, we can't. The fate of the multiverse depends on us." Just then the doors to the conference room burst open, and a figure strode in, a tall, muscular Andorian with a jagged scar running down his face. Hall and Boron whirled around, their hands reaching for their weapons. "Who are you?" Hall demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. The Andorian held up his hands, his expression grim. "I am General Zorik from a universe where the Andorians and humans have been at war for centuries. I come with a warning." Hall and Boron exchanged a glance, their suspicion giving way to curiosity. "Speak," Boron said, his voice guarded. Zorik stepped forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. "The rival faction that opposes your mission has formed an alliance with the humans from my universe. They possess weapons capable of destroying entire planets, and they will stop at nothing to reach the progenitors first." Hall felt a chill run down his spine. "Why are you telling us this?" Zorik's expression hardened. "Because if they succeed, they will use the progenitors' knowledge to conquer every universe in the multiverse. Billions will die, and the very fabric of reality will be torn apart." Hall and Boron looked at each other, the weight of Zorik's words sinking in. "What do you propose we do?" Boron asked, his voice tight. Zorik leaned forward, his scarred face inches from Hall's. "Abandon your mission. Return to your own universes and prepare for war. It's the only way to protect your people." Hall shook his head, his face hardened. "We can't do that. We've come too far to turn back now." Boron nodded, his eyes hard. "Hall is right. The progenitor's knowledge could be the key to ending the war in your universe, to bringing peace to the multiverse. We have to try." Zorik stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Very well. But you cannot face this threat alone." He turned to the Terran experts who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention. "I propose an alliance. My soldiers are the most skilled warriors in the multiverse, and your ships are the most advanced. Together we can protect the sanctuary and ensure that the progenitor's knowledge falls into the right hands." The Terrans looked to Hall and Boron, who nodded in agreement. "We'll need to move quickly," Hall said, his mind racing. "If the rival faction is already on their way—" Zorik held up a hand, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Leave that to me. I'll assemble my troops and meet you at the staging point. We'll show those traitors what happens when they mess with the wrong universes." As Zorik strode from the room, Hall turned to Boron, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Are you ready for this?" Boron met his gaze, his expression grim. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go find the progenitors." The Terran ships hung in the void of space like gleaming silver needles, their hulls dripping with advanced weaponry. Hall stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the display as the fleet assembled around them. "All ships report in," he said, his voice steady. One by one the captains of the other ships appeared on the screen, their faces set with drive. "Red Squadron, standing by," said a grizzled human with a scar across his cheek. "Blue Squadron, ready for action," said a lithe, green-skinned alien with glowing eyes. "Gold Squadron, locked and loaded," said a massive, four-armed creature with a voice like thunder. Hall nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. These were the best of the best, the most skilled warriors and pilots from across the Terran Confederation. With them at his side, he knew they could face any challenge, Boron stepped onto the bridge, his armor gleaming in the dim light. "General Zoric's troops are ready," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "They're waiting for us at the staging point." Hall took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Then let's not keep them waiting." He input the coordinates for the staging point, his heart pounding as the ship lurched into motion. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled through the portal, the fabric of reality twisting and warping around them. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a massive asteroid field, the rocks tumbling and colliding in a chaotic dance. And there, waiting for them, was General Zoric's fleet. A ragtag assortment of ships from across the multiverse, their hulls scarred and pitted from countless battles. "General Zoric, this is Captain Hall of the Terran Confederation," Hall said, his voice steady. "We're ready to proceed to the sanctuary." Zoric's face appeared on the display, a fierce grin splitting his scarred visage. "Excellent. My troops are itching for a fight. Let's not disappoint them." Together, the two fleets set off through the asteroid field, their shields flaring as they deflected the tumbling rocks. Hall watched the sensor readouts with a growing sense of unease, his eyes scanning for any sign of the rival faction. "I don't like this," Boron muttered, his fingers drumming on the console. "It's too quiet. Where are they?" As if in answer to his question, the sensors suddenly lit up with a flurry of activity. "Multiple contacts coming in fast," the tactical officer shouted, her voice tight with alarm. Hall's eyes widened as he saw the ships that dropped out of hyperspace, sleek black vessels overflowing with advanced weaponry, their hulls emblazoned with the insignia of the rival faction. "All ships battle stations," he barked, his heart pounding in his chest. "Prepare to engage the enemy." The Terran and Andorian ships surged forward, their weapons blazing as they met the enemy head-on. The void of space erupted with the flash of plasma cannons and the scream of missiles, the ships dancing and weaving in a deadly ballet. Hall gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles tightening as he watched the battle unfold. The Terran ships were faster and more maneuverable, but the enemy vessels were heavily armored and packed a devastating punch. "We're losing shields on the port side," the tactical officer shouted, her face pale with fear. Hall gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. They couldn't afford to lose this battle. The fate of the multiverse hung in the balance. And then out of the corner of his eye he saw it, a small unassuming asteroid tumbling through the chaos of the battle. An idea began to form in his mind, a risky move that just might turn the tide. "Boron, do you see that asteroid?" he asked, his voice tight with excitement. Boron followed his gaze, his eyes widening as he realized what Hall was suggesting. "You're not thinking—" Hall nodded, a grim smile spreading across his face. "We're going to use it as a battering ram, lure the enemy ships in close, then detonate it right in their midst." Boron hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his expression hardening with dedication. "Let's do it." Hall turned to the tactical officer, his voice ringing with authority. "Divert all power to the tractor beams, lock onto that asteroid, and prepare to pull it in on my signal." The officer nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "Tractor beams locked on, sir." Hall took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. If they failed now, the progenitor's knowledge would fall into the wrong hands, and the multiverse would be doomed. "All ships fall back to the asteroid's coordinates," he ordered, his voice steady. "Prepare to detonate on my mark." The Terran and Andorian ships disengaged from the enemy, their engines flaring as they raced towards the tumbling rock. The enemy ships gave chase, their weapons blazing as they tried to pick off the fleeing vessels. "Wait for it," Hall muttered, his eyes locked on the sensor readouts. "Wait for it." And then, just as the enemy ships reached the asteroid, Hall smacked his fist down on the console. "Now!" The tractor beams flared to life, seizing the asteroid in an unbreakable grip. The Terran and Andorian ships scattered like leaves in a storm, their shields flaring as they absorbed the brunt of the blast. The enemy ships had no time to react. The asteroid detonated in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave tearing through their hulls effortlessly. One by one they crumpled and shattered, their crews consumed by the fiery inferno. Hall sagged back in his chair, his heart pounding with relief. They had done it. They had won. But even as the cheers of his crew filled the bridge, he knew that the battle was a long way to go. The rival faction would not take this defeat lightly. They would regroup and come at them again, with even greater numbers and firepower. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the multiverse, the progenitor's sanctuary waited, its secrets tantalizingly close, but still out of reach. Hall turned to Boron, his expression grim. "Set a course for the sanctuary's coordinates. We have to get there before they do." Boron nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship hurtled through the void, the fate of the multiverse resting on their shoulders. Hall knew that the road ahead would be hard, filled with danger and uncertainty. But he also knew that they had no choice but to press on. The progenitor's knowledge was too valuable to let fall into the wrong hands, and too vital to the survival of every universe in the multiverse. As the ship raced towards its destination, Hall closed his eyes, his mind filled with visions of the battles to come. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what enemies they would face, or what sacrifices they would have to make. But he did know one thing. He would never stop fighting, never stop searching for the truth. The progenitors had left their mark on the multiverse, and it was up to him to ensure that their legacy endured, no matter the consequences. The portal spat them out into a world that was at once familiar and utterly alien. The architecture bore the unmistakable hallmarks of progenitor design, but there was a coldness to it, a sterility that sent shivers down Hall's spine. The streets were empty, save for the occasional patrol of heavily armed soldiers, their faces hidden behind featureless black helmets. "I don't like this," Boron muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "Something's wrong here." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a dozen soldiers materialized out of thin air, their weapons trained on the team. Hall raised his hands slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Identify yourselves," one of the soldiers barked, his voice distorted by his helmet's audio filters. "We're travelers," Hall said carefully. "From another universe. We mean you no harm." The soldier let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Another universe? Do you take us for fools? The multiverse is a myth, a bedtime story for gullible children." Before Hall could respond, a wave of psychic energy slammed into his mind, driving him to his knees. He heard Boron cry out in pain beside him, and then everything went black. When he came to, he was kneeling on a cold metal floor, his hands bound behind his back. He looked up and found himself staring into the face of a being out of a nightmare. The Emperor towered over him, his body a mass of twisted flesh and cybernetic enhancements. His eyes glowed with an unearthly light, boring into Hall's soul. "You are not of this universe," the Emperor said, his voice a rumble that shook the very air. "I have seen the truth in your mind. The multiverse is real, and you seek the progenitor's secrets." Hall felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this progenitor Emperor would be different from the ones they had encountered before, more willing to share his knowledge. But then the Emperor smiled, and Hall's blood ran cold. "I offer you a choice," the Emperor said, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "Join me in my conquest of the multiverse, and I will spare your pathetic universes. Refuse, and I will destroy everything you hold dear." Hall glanced at Boron, saw the defiance in his eyes. They both knew the Emperor's offer was a lie, a trap to ensnare them in his web of tyranny. "We refuse," Hall said, his voice steady. "We will never join you." The Emperor's face twisted in anger. "Then you will die." He raised his hand, and Hall braced himself for the end. But before the Emperor could strike, one of the Terran soldiers let out a yell of triumph. The soldier, a skilled hacker named Zara, had managed to tap into the Emperor's psychic network, disrupting his control over his subjects. Chaos erupted in the throne room as the enslaved species turned on their progenitor masters. their minds free for the first time in generations. Hall felt his bonds dissolve, and he leaped to his feet, grabbing a fallen soldier's weapon. "We need to get to the portal chamber," he shouted over the din of battle. "If we can destroy the central hub, we can cripple their ability to travel between universes." Boron nodded, his face grim. They fought their way through the chaos, dodging energy blasts and psychic attacks. The portal chamber was heavily guarded, but Zara's hack had thrown the progenitor's security into disarray, and they managed to slip inside undetected. The chamber was vast, filled with row upon row of portals, each one leading to a different universe. In the center of the room stood a massive machine, pulsing with energy. Hall realized with a sinking feeling that this was the central hub, the key to the progenitor's power. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice grim. "It's the only way to stop them." Boron hesitated, his eyes fixed on the machine. "But if we do that, we'll be trapped here. We'll never be able to return to our own universes." Hall met his gaze, his expression resolute. "I know, but it's a sacrifice we have to make. The fate of the multiverse is at stake." Together they approached the machine, weapons raised. Hall took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a blast of psychic energy sent him flying backwards, slamming him into the wall. The Emperor strode into the chamber, his face a mask of rage. "Did you really think you could defy me?" he snarled. "I am the master of the multiverse, and I will not be denied my destiny." Hall struggled to his feet, his head spinning. He saw Boron lying motionless on the floor, blood trickling from his nose. Zara was pinned against the wall, her face contorted in pain as the Emperor assaulted her mind. Hall gritted his teeth as he fired his weapon, the energy bolt sizzling through the air and slamming into the advancing enemy forces. Beside him, the alternate Boron fought with a savage fury, his blade flashing in a deadly arc as he cut down the Andorian and human soldiers who dared to come too close. "There's too many of them," Hall shouted over the din of battle, ducking behind a shattered pillar as a volley of blasts scorched the air above his head. The alternate Boron grunted, his face streaked with blood and sweat. "We have to hold them off," he growled, lunging forward to impale a charging Andorian on his blade. "If they reach the central hub before Boron and the hacker can set the charges." Hall nodded, an unshakable focus settling over him. He may not have trusted this alternate version of his friend, but right now, they were all that stood between the multiverse and total annihilation. Together they fought on, their weapons blazing as they cut a path through the enemy ranks. The floor grew slick with blood and gore, the air thick with the stench of death and ozone. In the central hub, Boron and the Terran hacker worked feverishly to plant the explosives, their fingers flying over the alien controls. The chamber thrummed with power, the walls pulsing with a sickly green light. Suddenly a blast of psychic energy slammed into them, sending them flying across the room. The Emperor loomed over them, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "How you dare to defy me?" he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I am the master of the multiverse, and I will not be denied my destiny." Boron staggered to his feet, his heart pounding from the psychic assault. He could feel the Emperor's presence pressing against his thoughts, trying to crush his will. But he would not yield. He had come too far to fail now. Reaching deep within himself, Boron called upon the ancient mental disciplines of his people, erecting a wall of shimmering force around his mind. The Emperor's attacks battered against it, but he held firm, his face contorted with effort. "You cannot win," he ground out, his voice strained. "Your empire is built on lies and suffering. It will fall one way or another." The Emperor laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made Boron's skin crawl. "You are a fool," he sneered, his eyes glowing with malevolent power. "I have seen the truth of the multiverse, and it is mine to command. All will kneel before me, or they will perish." He lashed out with another blast of psychic energy, but Boron was ready for it. He caught the attack on his mental shield, gritting his teeth as he absorbed the impact. From the corner of his eye, he saw the Terran hacker crawling towards the final charge, her face pale with fear. "Now!" Boron shouted, pouring all of his strength into his defenses. "Set the charge!" The hacker's hand closed around the device, her fingers trembling as she armed it. The Emperor's head snapped towards her, his eyes widening in realization. He let out a roar of fury, gathering his power for a final, devastating attack. But before he could unleash it, Hall slammed into him from behind, knocking him off balance. The Emperor stumbled, his concentration broken. Boron leapt forward, his blade flashing in the pulsing light. He drove it into the Emperor's chest, feeling the sickening crunch of bone and sinew. The Emperor let out a gurgling cry, his eyes bulging in disbelief. He clawed at the blade, his lifeblood spilling out onto the floor. Then, with a final shudder, he collapsed, his body dissolving into a cloud of shimmering particles. Boron sagged to his knees, his strength spent. Around him the chamber shook and rumbled, the explosives counting down to detonation. Hall grabbed him by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "We have to go," he shouted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The portal, now!" They stumbled towards the shimmering vortex, the hacker close behind them. The explosions began to rip through the chamber, the walls crumbling and buckling under the onslaught. They dove through the portal, just as the central hub erupted in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave hurling them into the swirling void. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a world of chaos and confusion. The progenitor empire was collapsing, its subjects rising up in rebellion against their hated masters. Ships battled in the skies above, while cities burned and crumbled on the planet's surface. Boron looked around, his eyes wide with wonder and horror. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the progenitors that would be felt across the multiverse. But at what cost? How many lives had been lost? How many worlds shattered in the process? As if sensing his thoughts, Hall placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression grim. "We did what we had to do," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of their actions. The progenitors' tyranny could not be allowed to continue. Boron nodded, his heart heavy. He knew that their journey was just getting started. There were still countless universes to explore, countless secrets to uncover, but for now they had struck a blow for freedom, for the right of all species to chart their own destiny. And as they watched the progenitor empire crumble before their eyes, Boron felt a flicker of hope amid the darkness. Perhaps with the help of their new allies and the knowledge they had gained, they could build a better future for all the universes, one free from the shackles of oppression and fear. Hall stumbled through the swirling portal, his lungs burning as he gasped for air. The world spun around him, a kaleidoscope of shattered reality. He hit the ground hard, rolling to a stop on a barren, lifeless plain. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet, taking in his surroundings. The sky above was a sickly green, the horizon twisted and warped like a funhouse mirror. In the distance, the ruins of a once great city loomed, its towers crumbling and its streets choked with debris. "Where are we?" Boron asked, his voice hoarse. Hall shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know, but it's not our universe or any of the others we've been to." The surviving members of their team gathered around them, their faces pale and drawn. They were a ragtag group now, a mix of humans and Andorians, united by the horrors they had witnessed and the sacrifices they had made. "The portal network is gone," the Terran hacker said, her voice trembling. "Destroyed. We're trapped here." Hall felt a sinking feeling in his gut. They had done what they had to do, had struck a blow against the progenitors that would be felt across the multiverse. But at what cost? How many lives had been lost? How many worlds shattered in the process? As they picked their way through the ruins, they saw signs of the chaos that had engulfed this universe. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of the progenitor empire's collapse, abandoned vehicles, discarded weapons, and the twisted remains of once great machines. But there were also signs of life amid the destruction. In the distance, they saw groups of survivors huddled around makeshift fires, their faces gaunt and haunted. Some were human, some Andorian, and others were species Hall had never seen before. "We need to help them," Boron said, his voice low. "We can't just leave them like this." Hall nodded, a dogged purpose settling over him. They had started this, had set in motion the events that had led to this moment. Now they had to see it through, had to try to build something better from the ashes of the progenitor empire. Together they set to work, using their knowledge of progenitor technology to establish makeshift shelters and power generators. They worked side by side with the survivors, learning their stories and their struggles. But even as they labored to create a new order, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The universe around them felt fragile, unstable, like a house of cards ready to collapse at any moment. It was the Terran hacker who figured it out first, her eyes widening in horror as she pored over the data from their scanners. "The destruction of the central hub," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's causing the universes to collapse in on each other. The balance has been disrupted." Hall felt a chill run down his spine. They had destroyed the progenitor empire, but in doing so, they may have doomed not just their own universes, but countless others. He looked at Boron, saw the same guilt and horror reflected in his eyes. They had fought so hard, had sacrificed so much, but now it all seemed for nothing. "We have to fix this," Hall said, his voice raw with emotion. "We have to find a way to stabilize the multiverse before it's too late." But even as he spoke the words, he knew the terrible truth. The only way to save the multiverse was to use the last remaining progenitor technology, the final pieces of the empire they had fought so hard to destroy. And if they did that, if they used the very tools of their enemy to try to undo the damage they had caused, they would be trapped in this universe forever, unable to return to their own. Hall looked at Boron, saw the conflict raging in his eyes. They had come so far together, had forged a bond that transcended universes, but now they faced an impossible choice. In the end, it was Hall who made the decision. He knew that Boron had to return to his own universe, had to warn his people of the danger that threatened them all, and he knew that he was the only one who could stay behind, the only one with the knowledge and the skills to wield the progenitor technology. "You have to go," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You have to get back to your own universe to warn them of what's coming." Boron shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I can't leave you here, Hall. We started this together. We should finish it together." But Hall was adamant. He pulled Boron into a fierce embrace, feeling the weight of all they had been through, all they had shared. "It's the only way," he whispered, his voice choked with tears. "You have to go. You have to live." One by one, the others said their goodbyes, their faces etched with grief and gratitude. The Terran hacker handed Hall a small device, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This will give you access to the last remaining portal," she said, her voice trembling. "Use it wisely." Hall nodded, tucking the device into his pocket. He watched as Boron led the team towards the portal, their forms shimmering and distorting as they stepped through the vortex. And then he was alone, the last living soul in a universe on the brink of collapse. He turned towards the ruins of the progenitor empire, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had to do. He didn't know if he would succeed, if he could find a way to stabilize the multiverse and undo the damage they had caused. But he had to try, had to give everything he had to save the countless lives that hung in the balance. As he set to work, his mind raced with memories of all he had seen and done, of the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment, and though his heart ached with the knowledge that he might never see his home again, he knew that he had made the right choice. For in the end, there was no greater sacrifice than to give one's life for the sake of others, to put the needs of the many above the desires of the few. And as Hall labored on, alone in a universe on the brink of oblivion, he knew that he would gladly make that sacrifice again and again, for as long as it took, to save the multiverse from the brink of destruction. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.